to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Season 5 of Raising Teens. I'm your host, Collett Smart. I'm a psychologist, a teacher, and also a parent in the middle of raising my own teen and young adult children. I started this podcast because I know that many teens are struggling, and I wanted to create an online village of support for parents. I'm joined again this season by well-known experts on teen mental health and well-being. I have such hope for this generation of young people, so each episode is jam-packed with support so that you can get on with the job that you do best. That is, connecting with and loving your teen. On today's episode, I will be talking with Ashley Fell from McCrindle Research on the future world of work. In other words, what will the workplace look like for this generation of teens? Like me, you might have a teen at home who doesn't know what they want to do yet, or you might have a child who is anxious about their future. Or perhaps you are worried about where your teen is going or whether robots will be taking over all the jobs. You might also be wondering whether you should focus on their passions or something that is financially viable. We will cover all of that and more in today's episode. Ashley Fell is a social researcher, author, TEDx speaker, and director of advisory at the internationally recognized McCrindle Research. She is co-author of 2 books on leadership and generational insights, Work Wellbeing and Generation Alpha. And her expertise is in training and equipping leaders and teams on how to communicate across generational barriers. She is also the host of McCrindle's new podcast, The Future Report. Hi, Ashley. Thanks so much for joining us on Raising Teens.
My absolute pleasure, Collett. It's a delight to be here.
I just love the work of you and everyone at McCrindle. I just find it so hopeful. Your research always looks to foster cohesion between generations, understanding between generations, rather than this picking apart and criticizing everyone. And I'm always an advocate for teens. And one criticism I can't stand is that this generation of young people is lazy and they slack at work and all they want is just to be spoon-fed. And it just frustrates me because I think, as listeners know, I've got 3 children. My children actually fall into Generation Z, even though I've got a 14-year-old and a 21-year-old. They're kind of at each end almost of Gen Z. And I know we've spoken about Generation Z on the podcast before. Just for the listeners, Generation Z falls between 1997 and 2012. Am I right, Ashley?
Yeah, the definitions are a little bit varied based on country. So we tend to go with a little bit earlier in the 90s and then finishing them at 2010. But it is around that sort of, mostly that they've come of age in the early 2000s is really what we're talking about with Gen Z. They are our high school students of today predominantly.
Okay. And so with my kids, I've got 2 young adults and then 1 teen who's just counting down the months to actually get his first part-time job. And so, I don't know, in my opinion, our young adult children work really hard. They're balancing work, they're balancing uni, they're investing in relationships and community work. Our high school kids are still trying to do school and HSC, and a lot of their friends are doing the same. And I see shopping centres filled with young people who are working part-time. So I'm not pretending that some young people don't cause their bosses headaches. Some do, of course, but that's the same for us adults, isn't it? And I don't know, I would love for you to just talk to us about the difference with this generation of teens and perhaps their parents or grandparents in terms of things like work ethic and their desires for their careers. I'll just start with a quick quote from Mark McCrindle. Many young people don't seek a job as much as they seek an opportunity. So talk to us, Ash.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that you pointed out even in that question around the fact that I guess all young people, because of that life stage, there is an element of they haven't really maybe had to work before. They are emerging into their new part-time role or full-time role. So I feel like whatever generation you belong to, probably at that age, it's fair to say, oh, they don't have that knowledge of the workforce. They maybe have unrealistic expectations about career progression and those sorts of things. So I feel like there's a part of it is that just young people in general, that's a characteristic of us, whatever generation, whatever year we were in that life stage. But we believe at McCrindle it is a little bit unfair to sort of tarnish a whole generation with that sort of title of being lazy or entitled or, opportunistic.
To illustrate the struggle between parents and their teens, I want to share this quote. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in place of exercise. This quote was from Socrates around 400 BC. So this isn't a new thing. This generation isn't worse off or unique compared to past generations. It's how everyone has seen the younger generation for thousands of years. It is so important for us to distinguish between generational differences and simply developmental stages of life.
Part of that is understanding the context that has shaped Generation Z. So they have grown up in the last few years of a pandemic. They've seen the world of work change. I was actually speaking to someone recently who said, I've only ever worked in a world of work from home. They've only ever known that world. They haven't worked in an office before. They've only started working in sort of 2020, and that was when COVID hit and had all these transformative changes. They've only known a world of screens and technology and how that's been integrated there. And that does change their expectations, understandably. So our research actually points, I think, in the opposite direction, that we're talking about a generation who are really conscientious workers, who are happy to work hard. And that comes from our Education Future report that we conducted last year. So we asked this question about what are Gen Z's top 5 hopes? And number 1 is to own their own home, followed by having full financial freedom and independence. Number 3, excel in their career. Number 4, travel and see the world. And number 5, pursue interests and hobbies. So even the fact that they want to own their own home, I think they've watched my generation, which is the millennials, get a bit badgered for our love of Smash Davo and, being locked out of the housing market. And they're probably going to respond to that and go, okay, well, if we want to get in to this great Australian dream, we need to work hard, we need to save, we need to start early. And I think it's also reflected in their top 5 fears, which is number 1, to not have enough money to live comfortably. Number 2, being stuck in a job they don't enjoy or find fulfillment in. Number 3, not reaching their full potential. Number 4, not finding love. And number 5, never being able to own their own home. So this shows us they're values driven. They want to work with purpose. And I think they are willing to work hard.
That's incredible. As you talk, I hear my own children and my young adult children and their friends' language in that. I love that you've actually got something to back that, some research that says this is what this generation is thinking about. They're thinking about their own homes, and a lot of them have been robbed of travel. They had these dreams of traveling as soon as they left school or soon after, and COVID has changed all that. I'm going to read something from Work Wellbeing, your book with Mark, on Generation Z. It says, this generation are powerful players in today's work culture, but with a lifetime of experience in online learning and social connection through technology platforms, working remotely came naturally to them. Some have playfully called them Zoomers. And when Zoom became the new platform for work meetings and classroom interaction, this generation gave new meaning to that label. And I mean, my daughter spent her entire HSC, or just about, online, and it was a whole new world. It changed things for them and for us. And so really, I heard you talk on your podcast recently. You spoke about the desire for work as social connection. And so can you talk a little bit about that in terms of this generation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like there's a couple of things at play here. And I feel like it was partly highlighted in that quote you read from Work Wellbeing, that Generation Z and younger generations, even our youngest Gen Alphas, they're so tech savvy. They've grown up in this world where technology is integrated into their lives. I'm not saying, the adaptation to online learning or work from home wasn't difficult for them, but they have been set up with those technology skills to sort of, know how it works. And there's that part of it. So I feel like they were able to adjust to that transition. However, what was also really fascinating for us, and we conducted so much research during COVID because we're social researchers and we observed societal changes, and society was just rapidly changing before our eyes during COVID and even now, and the impacts of it. And what we saw was that it was actually the younger generations who said, yeah, we like working from home and we expect flexibility, but we also want to be back in the office with our teams. And I think it was maybe even the older generations, maybe who've got children or who have multiple competing priorities, who say, oh, work from home was great because it enabled us to have some flexibility. But for the younger generations who really rely on work for that social connection, they were saying, oh, we miss the office. We want to go back. And we found that in our own team. We had some younger Gen Z team members who sometimes when we had optional days, they're the ones in the office because they want the connection, they want the fun. And we wrote in that work wellbeing book this quote that says, to some, work is simply a job, but to many more, it's a lifeline to social interaction, purpose, and a place of belonging. And I think that's true for all generations, but Generation Z aren't as engaged in other forms of community as maybe those of us who are a little bit older than them are. And so work takes on a bit of a different meaning. So I think organizations and thus leading Gen Z need to be aware that, yes, they're tech savvy. Yes, they're going to expect flexibility and work from home, and they're well equipped to do that. But the office and the workplace also plays an important role for all of us, but especially for the younger generation in terms of that social connection as well.
It's so encouraging because I've spoken on the podcast before about the importance of part-time jobs for young people, and that speaks to me about the impact that a part-time job can have on a young person's social life and social interaction and social skills. And so actually, rather than parents holding their kids back and saying, they just need to be concentrating on schoolwork or uni work, that really speaks to me about how that is part of holistically our young people immersing themselves in the world and learning new skills, including social skills. So that's really encouraging. So can you talk to me a little bit then about what are the trends you see impacting the future of work for this generation?
I mean, for us, there's lots. And I think for what most people think about the future of work is robotics and artificial intelligence and automation. And I think many parents probably are a little bit worried about the future of work for their children. And I feel like the question that they're kind of asking is, will a robot take my child's job, or will a robot take my job as we move to more machine-assisted workplaces? And there is an element that as we move to those kinds of work and integrating AI and automation, that anything that can be automated will be automated. So there is the technological change happening. But there's also demographic change, like an aging population and an aging workforce, which increases demand for younger workers. We've got the generational transition happening where I think some organizations think, oh, Gen Z, they're just the high school students, but the oldest of them are in their mid to late 20s and they're establishing themselves in their career. Some of them might already have maybe 10 years of experience from part-time work to sort of side hustles to those things. So the way we work is changing. And of course, then we've already touched on it, but the work from home era, flexibility, where we work, and therefore how organizations lead their teams, how young people engage in the culture and the purpose of an organization when they do work part-time or part-time remotely. So there are lots of different trends that I think are at play. It's not just the technological, it's not just that, but it's also, how we work, where we work, and even the types of work. This younger generation, they're very entrepreneurial. They're happy to change jobs very frequently, as I'm sure many employers know, and they're happy to even create their own side hustle and give something a go, which I think is incredible and something to be commended about them, that, this younger generation might be an employee at the same time they might have their own organization or side hustle or that entrepreneurial kind of spirit. So there are lots of positives, I think, to the future of work and how this generation is going to shape that moving forward.
Yeah, that whole idea of the side hustle, I've seen that in this generation. A friend of ours has a daughter and she is studying at uni, but she goes off to Vinnie's and all these op shops and buys a whole bunch of stuff that she finds as real treasures and then sells them on Depop, and she's making a fortune. And I just thought, good on her. It's her way of, she's quite creative. So she's studying an artsy type degree, and it's her way of contributing to the world, but also being sustainable. Isn't that, that's a big part of this generation's heart. And then also having part-time work, and she's being entrepreneurial. It's incredible. So you're right. Another thing is, you mentioned a little bit about how this generation will likely change jobs a whole lot. My grandfather's time and even my dad's time, they spent their entire careers in the same job. They kind of graduated from TAFE or uni or straight from high school and got the gold watch at the end of, 50 years in a career or more. This generation is quite different. So can you talk to us a little bit about how many jobs or careers you expect this generation to have?
It's a stat that I love to share because I work in social research and people are like, what's your favorite stat? And I would say this one because I feel like it's a little bit shocking, but it's really fun to sort of explain and think about. So if we think about a school leaver today, so Gen Z, we predict they will have 18 jobs across 6 careers in their lifetime. And most people, at barbecues or at conferences are like wide-eyed, like, are you serious? And that's based on a statistic from the Australian Human Resources Institute, which has showed that the average length of time someone stays in one role or job today is down to 2 years and 9 months. So we use that stat, we extrapolate that out for a school leaver today, noting that they will live longer, Gen Z, and so they're going to have to work later into their life, presumably. They're going to have a mosaic of different roles and careers and jobs and side hustles and part-time work. And I think for our generation and those of us who are older, like you mentioned, Collett, it was about that career for life. It was, what are you going to do when you grow up and what are you going to do? And now there's so many more options available. There's more career options. There's more degrees and courses and qualifications available to this generation. So there's that changing nature of work. There is that entrepreneurial spirit. I think that all does play into the fact that this generation are going to have lots of different jobs and careers. And we say they move across these roles a lot. The only thing they're not moving, though, is out of the family home, and they're living longer with mum and dad. And sometimes they get labelled a generation of kippers, which is kids in parents' pockets eroding retirement savings. So a bit of poking a little bit of fun at them there.
The workforce looks very different for this generation compared to their parents or their grandparents. For example, in New South Wales in the last 60 years, the ratio of average house price to average income is 6 times what it was. So earning a sixth of your salary, could you have bought your first house? We need to be compassionate. And although good spending habits are important, we need to recognize that our young people's priorities have had to shift. For example, their focus won't be on paying their house off by 40, and that's okay.
The Gen Ys and Gen Z, we're more formally educated. So that means that we're starting our earning years maybe a little bit later, maybe presumably with a big debt, delaying life markers like having children, getting married. So all of these things sort of play into that really mobile generation in terms of their careers. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and how organizations seek to sort of not only attract this generation into their workforce, but also retain them. Because imagine many employees are saying a little bit scared and going, what if I invest in training this generation, but they just leave? And I love this quote from Richard Branson, who said, train people well enough so they can leave, but treat them well enough so they don't want to. And so I think organizations need to sort of get that mix right of training and culture and making sure this generation feels aligned to the purpose, because we know from our research that this generation is really wanting to work for organizations where their values and purpose do align with their own.
Yeah. And that's really fascinating, that whole idea of values. Values seem to be something that is important to this generation. They're not just the slack lot lying on the couch. I think we might have to have you back at some point to talk about kippers. That sounds like a good topic. So in this future world where things are changing for this generation and they're changing jobs so often, what are some of the skills that you think are important to help them to future-proof their career?
I think it's a really good question to be thinking about if you're a young person, to be thinking about if you're leading or parenting a Generation Z, and also to be thinking about just across the generations, because I think for all of us, we're probably going to be moving roles and jobs a bit more. We're living in a time of, the great resignation as a result of COVID and people reevaluating their work and moving. And instead of career for life for this generation, I think what a better sort of phrase is skills for life. And instead of thinking what what job do you want to do? It's more about what do you enjoy? What skills do you find that you're most drawn to? And even the education sector, we find, is moving away from just focusing on the foundational literacies of how students apply core skills to everyday tasks like numeracy, literacy, scientific literacy, and moving towards this more holistic education of children and focusing as well on the competencies. So how students approach complex tasks like critical thinking and problem solving, creativity, communication, collaboration, and also the character qualities of how they approach a changing environment, because we're living in times of rapid change. I don't think it's going to get any slower. And so can students be curious and take initiative and have persistence and adapt to changing times? And even as we think about the future of more machine-assisted workplaces and anything that can be automated will be, it actually means a focus on STEM skills. They're super important, but also on those what has been typically called soft skills like leadership and communication, because we're not going to have computers and machines leading people. We're going to have people leading people. And can we be empathetic? And it's almost like those uniquely human skills become even more important in the future. So I think as we think about the future of work, it is that holistic approach, thinking about skills and those human skills, particularly in terms of how we lead others, how we manage ourselves, how we work with persistence and grit. If a student leaves with those sorts of skills today, I think that's going to be transferable across different roles and different careers, and that sort of future-proofs them in one way or another.
I'm so glad you brought up soft skills, because at a lot of my parenting seminars, I talk about that. I say universities, I work in a university as well, and universities are also recognizing that our students don't just need the IQ skills, they need the EQ skills. And so that is also becoming a focus in universities in some of the courses that we run, and they're more and more embedded in our universities. And we're seeing that more and more in schools now, focusing on relationship intelligence and emotional intelligence and so on. Those are parts of what build resilience in young people. So finally, Ashley, what advice do you give for this generation, either speaking directly to them or some advice for the parents or educators who are listening today, who are leading this generation of Gen Z? And in particular, how do we help future-proof them for their career or their work life?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny, I was actually reflecting on a conversation I was having with someone on holidays a few weeks back, and I was talking to her. She's in year 10, and we were talking about what she wants to do for work when she leaves school, if she has an idea. And she was saying that she was sort of sharing with me that she was feeling a bit of pressure from people in her life in terms of, I think she had an aunt or uncle who was really a successful lawyer, and they were like, you want to go down the law path because it pays well and all this, and it's job security. And then other influences in her life were like, but what about finding something that you're passionate about? And she was like, should I go down the route that leads to success or something that I enjoy? And I think my advice is to find something that you're passionate about, and finding that is a worthy endeavor. And I think while not every job is going to fulfill us, and those of us who are a bit older, who've worked a bit longer, there are days where the work is hard, even if you're passionate about it, and not every day is filled with joy and excitement. But especially for this generation, they are looking for purpose. And so finding those sorts of jobs or those skills that you find joy in or are passionate about are really good. And if you can line up what you're passionate about doing with something that you can be well trained in and paid for, then you've lined up three really important things. So the passion, the contribution, that sense of purpose, I would say don't settle for that. And it's okay if you don't know exactly what that is and you take a little bit of time to figure it out. I think there's a lot of pressure that we need to know. But also I would say just getting started and finding momentum is also important. And you shared that, I think, earlier, Cole, around the importance of, getting started maybe in a part-time role or somewhere where you just learn how to work with others, where you gain experience, you meet people, you make connections. And I think for me, as I look back on my career, I love my job here at McCrindle. I've been here for almost 10 years, so not your standard millennial in terms of how long.
No, definitely
going for the long
not.
service, which not many people achieve these days. But I think It's fascinating because when I look back on my career and where I worked part-time and what I didn't think they were connected. But when I look back in hindsight, I go, okay, there were skills that I learned in that role that have now helped me here. And it's okay if your career path doesn't look like a ladder. It's more a jungle gym, you know, you divert and then you do something different. But all those experiences and roles, if you can look and look back and learn from those different experiences, I think that's going to put you in better stead for those transferable skills to work across different industries, take a hold of different opportunities, and enjoy the journey. You know, I think it can be, stressful. I remember putting a lot of pressure on myself, and our research has found that younger people and parents of younger people do put a lot of pressure on Gen Z to be high achievers. And I think that's good to be motivated, but enjoy the journey. It's a really fun life stage and you only get it once. So there are a few of my tips and advice.
I found this episode so encouraging, especially that we need to focus on our teens' careers as a jungle gym rather than a ladder. If you would like to know more about Ashley's work or find her books on generational differences, you can find her at mccrindle.com.au. You can also find me or leave a question for a future episode via email or my Facebook page or via raisingteens.au. Or you can go to the Hope 1032 podcast page. Please subscribe and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love to see you next episode, and in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.